Each of us has a unique career story to tell. For some, these fly high like rocket launches. For others, they're more like the game of chutes and ladders, with advances and setbacks along the way. Either way, we learn countless lessons from these experiences. And that's what we put into the spotlight here at Career Sessions Career Lessons. Join discussions featuring a variety of guests sharing their stories of ups and downs, as well as the secrets of their success and what drives them to continue moving forward. We break down the tools and resources that will help you establish your dream career and realize your professional goals. Here's your host, J.R. Lowry.
Hi, I'm J.R. Lowry, and this is Career Sessions Career Lessons, which is brought to you by Pathwise.io. Pathwise is dedicated to helping you be the best professional you can be, providing a mix of career and leadership coaching, courses, content, and community. Basic membership is free, so what are you waiting for? Visit Pathwise and join today. Today, my guest is Dr. Ruth Gotian. Ruth is the Chief Learning Officer and Associate Professor of Education in Anesthesiology and former Assistant Dean of Mentoring and Executive Director of the Mentoring Academy at Weill Cornell Medicine. She publishes on topics such as networking, mentoring, leadership development, and optimizing success, and has written for Nature, Scientific American, Academic Medicine, Psychology Today, Forbes, and the Harvard Business Review. Ruth is the author of The Success Factor, Developing the Mindset and Skills for Peak Performance, and she hosts a podcast where she gathers high achievers to talk about their journey to success. She herself is a high achiever, having recently won the Thinkers 50 Distinguished Achievement Radar Award, ranking her the #1 emerging management thinker in the world. She received her bachelor's and master's degrees in business management from the University of Stony Brook in New York and her doctorate at Teachers College, Columbia University. Ruth, welcome. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's spend a little bit of time just talking about what you do. What's your current work at Weill Cornell Medicine?
I have the best job in the world because my job is to make people successful. I am a Chief Learning Officer. I help people be the best versions of themselves. I coach all of our faculty who want the coaching. I'm also on the faculty where I study extreme high achievers. So I study Nobel Prize winners and astronauts and Olympians and NBA champions to figure out what has made them successful and how the rest of us mere mortals can achieve greater success. Kind of cool.
It is kind of cool. And I know you've certainly done some interesting interviews. Those come out in the book that we'll get to a little bit later. You've been at Cornell for a long time, albeit in a variety of roles. What's kept you there for so long?
Yes, I have been here for 27 and a half years. I tell people I started when I was 5. Actually, my second job after grad school. When you, when you work with really, really, really bright people, you want to become a better version of yourself. And I'm always learning something new every day. So I'm not just helping other people become successful. I'm learning every day in the process. So my brain is always active. So it's been great.
And it's a far cry from what you started in. You started in banking, didn't you?
Did finance.
Yeah.
My first 2 degrees are in business, and I worked in finance and international banking. And that's when I realized you could be really good at something and not enjoy it.
Yeah.
And, imagine you get 2 degrees and you start working in what you got your degree in, and you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. So I figured out what I do want to do and realized that changes over time. I actually went back to school at the age of 43 to get my doctorate. And that was one of the best decisions I ever made.
Yeah, I hear from people who go back later in life to get their doctorate, later than we'll say their mid-20s, right? That it is very much, it is a trade-off in many ways because, they're typically raising families and things like that at the time. And so they're really committed to it. And when they come out, they're like really, really glad they did it. Sounds like that's the case with you too.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, I have a family. I was working full time at elder care for my parents. So I was going to classes after all of that and doing my dissertation and doing the research for it while taking classes. I have perfected time management. But you know what? This time it was for me. And I knew that I was really enjoying it because, when you get that syllabus and they have the required reading, and then there's also recommended reading.
Yeah.
I was doing the required and the recommended because I loved it that much and I wanted
Yeah.
to learn and absorb everything I could.
Yeah.
That's when I knew I was hooked.
Yeah, it's good. So I heard you deliver a talk about mentoring at the Thinkers 50 conference, which is sort of what precipitated us doing this today. I know you're passionate about mentoring. What inspired you to become so passionate about mentoring?
I have had some amazing mentors in the past and some horrific mentors in the past. And I have started studying it and taking a deep dive to see what is it about it. And I have learned that those who are mentored out-earn and outperform those who are not. They have lower burnout. They have greater loyalty to their organization. It's a great retention tool. I mean, there's nothing bad about it.
Yeah.
So I took a deep dive. And one of the things that I realized when studying these high achievers in the book, The Success Factor, is that all the high achievers, from the astronauts to the Nobel Prize winners to Olympic champions, all of them surrounded themselves not just with one, but with a team of mentors. And I said, oh, this I have to look into more because they're all doing it. And these are people at the top of their game. So I'd been studying the mentorship, the art and science of mentorship for years and years and years. And it's actually the topic of my next book, The Financial Times Guide to Mentoring.
You mentioned having good mentors and bad mentors. Or was there a particular mentoring experience that really impacted you?
One of my mentors, Dr. Bert Shapiro, when I told him I was going back to school. Now, I only told 5 people I was going back because there was one school I really wanted to go to. It was very, very competitive. I was 43 years old. I knew my chances were slim. And of the 5, 3 wrote my letters of recommendation, and he was one of them. And when I told him I want to go back to school and this is what I want to study, and he said 6 words that changed my life. He said, do something important, not just interesting. Do something important, not just interesting. And that changed everything because I went from doing a nice to have institutional study to a groundbreaking international study, which led to the book, The Success Factor, led to all the articles, led to the grants, led to giving a keynote at Thinkers 50. So 6 words can change your life. Now, if you think carefully about what he said, he never told me what to do.
Yeah.
And he never stopped me from doing anything. He essentially told me to dream bigger. That's the difference.
And you obviously took that to heart.
Yes. I did. It changed all my research.
Yeah.
Made it a global study.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about the book. We'll come back to mentoring, but let's talk a bit about the book.
Sure.
The Success Factor. So as you've mentioned, you studied all sorts of high achievers, Olympians and astronauts and many
Cool
others.
People. Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. When you did the research for the book, was there anything that was really surprising to you in terms of the outcomes of the study?
It was fascinating to me because when I distilled all the information, I realized that all of them, it's not about habits. So really, we've been thinking about success all wrong. We were told to wake up at 5 a.m. and read for 8 hours a day and make your bed before you do anything else. Those are habits, and we cannot copy other people's habits because we have different lives, right? If I'm working full time and have a long commute and have a family, I can't read for 8 hours a day. It's not happening. But what we can do is emulate their mindset and customize it to our own life, which is what every single one of those high achievers did. So once I realized it's not about habits, it's about mindsets, and all of them, even though they were really in disparate fields, they all had the same 4 mindsets that really grounded and guided them. And that's when I realized that success can be learned. But I have a bunch of degrees and I have never had a class on how to succeed. So this book, The Success Factor, is that blueprint. I've reverse engineered the process that all these high achievers did. And I didn't just talk about what it was, I actually shared how to do it. And not just in one way, but there's a buffet of options for all of the elements of success because, what works for you is not going to work for me, right? Because we're different. And what works for me today may not work for me 6 months from now, a year from now, when I have, a new house, new job, new whatever, because our lives change, our interests change over time. So it's important to be able to pull different things out of that buffet of options.
But those 4 threads that you talked about, let's talk a bit about them. Can you summarize them for us?
I sure can. So the first element of success is that intrinsic motivation. Now, there's something in adult learning where we differentiate between intrinsic and extrinsic. Extrinsic motivation means you are doing it for that trophy, that diploma, that certificate, that bonus, that promotion. You're doing it when other people judge you. And I hate to break it to you, but that is how you will fail out or burn out, because you are never going to impress people all the time. But when you're doing it for yourself, when you're doing it for that fire in your belly, you're doing it for that passion that you have, the reason you wake up in the morning, the reason you can't quiet your mind at night, no one can take that away from you. That's called intrinsic motivation. And all of these high achievers have tapped into their intrinsic motivation. And what's interesting is when I ask them, how do you know when it's time to stop? And they say, I just don't have the passion for it anymore.
Yeah.
And that's why there's no guilt, no shame when they decide to step away, because they said, I don't love it the way I used to.
Yeah. And certainly for like a professional athlete, or an Olympian, they work so hard, day in, day out for years. And at some point, I guess you just hit this point where you're like, I've achieved enough. I'm ready to hang it up.
Yeah.
Go on to something else.
That's right. But you know what? I do a lot of executive coaching for elite athletes. And the reason I love working with them so much is that same passion that they brought into that training, that same fighting spirit, that same work ethic, that's a common thread in everything that they do. They bring that into whatever their new career is post the retirement from athletics. Because remember, they're usually pretty young when they retire from athletics. So that's why they're able to succeed in other things too. They've got that work ethic. They've got that intrinsic motivation. Those 4 elements of success translate into their new field.
Yeah. Most of us aren't Olympic athletes or professional athletes or CEOs or astronauts. It's hard sometimes, even when you have that intrinsic motivation, to not let it get drowned out by the extrinsic factors, right? Like, when people are telling you you're not doing a good enough job, or you're just not getting maybe an explicit positive feedback loop working for you.
Yeah.
Self-doubt comes in there. I would imagine that they all face that as well, but learn how to overcome it. Yeah.
They learn how to tune it out. I mean, can you imagine going in the Olympic arena or, this training, you're going to play at the Super Bowl or, whatever the big thing is, you have to learn how to drown out the noise. Now, remember, if they were only doing it for the medal, they would have quit after they got it. But I've spoken to so many Nobel Prize winners. I don't know of a single one who stopped doing science just because they won the Nobel Prize.
Right.
If anything, they double down to do more and do bigger projects, higher risk projects. It's never about the medal. It's nice. Who doesn't want to get those accolades for the work that they do? But that's not why you do it.
How does a mere mortal develop and foster that intrinsic motivation?
I'm glad you asked. There are actually techniques that you can do to figure out where that intrinsic motivation lies, realizing that it changes over time. And it usually changes when you have a transition in your life. A new job, a new child, a new house, a pandemic, any of those kinds of things cause us to change our passions. That's why so many people quit their jobs when the pandemic started. It was a shift, right? So if any of your listeners really want to take a deep dive into how to figure out where their true passions lie. Now, I talk about this quite a bit in the book, The Success Factor, but there is an exercise that I take you through. And it's called a passion audit. And a passion audit differentiates between what you're good at and what you're not good at, what you enjoy doing, what you don't enjoy doing, even if you're good at it, what you would do for free if you could. And there's a way to synthesize that, to see what it is that you're really interested in, and then figure out how you can infuse part of that into your job. Because the research has shown we only need to spend 20% of our time doing what we love at work in order to significantly reduce burnout.
Yeah.
So if your listeners want to try out that passion audit, it's a simple 3-column exercise, and they could just download it for free from my website at ruthgotian.com/passion audit, one word.
Okay, great. We'll put that in the show notes too. All right. So that's the first element.
Mm-hmm.
There are 3 more.
There are 3 more. So the second one is, you've heard of grit and perseverance and work ethic. Yeah, that's all true. You have to have a good work ethic. If you have all the talent in the world, but you're sitting and binging Netflix all day, you're not going to be very successful. Really what it is how you approach challenges. Now, I'll give you an example. One of the people who I interviewed was Dr. Peggy Whitson.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Peggy Whitson is a biochemist, and she had been working as a biochemist at NASA. And she was also a pilot, and she wanted to be an astronaut. And she applied and was rejected, and applied again and was rejected, and applied again and was rejected. This went on for 10 years, a full decade. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think I would apply for the same job for 10 full years. She said, no, this is what I want to do. I'm going in. And I said, well, what changed every time you applied? She said, I knew I was going to be an astronaut. The question was not if. The question was how.
Yeah.
What is the strategy I have not thought of yet? What was the gap that they were seeing that I haven't filled? And that was the approach she took. And it's a good thing she didn't give up, because ultimately she went on to become an astronaut.
Right.
She became the first female commander of the International Space Station, a role she held twice. And she went on to spend more days in space than any American astronaut of any gender. And this astronaut who was rejected, her application was rejected for 10 years, ultimately went on to become NASA's chief astronaut. So that second element is not just about the grit and resilience, right? And the work ethic. It's how you approach challenges. And you need to approach it with, it's not a question of if, it's a question of how. Control what you can control. You are in the driver's seat, and start thinking about, what is the strategy I haven't thought of yet? When you start approaching it that way, you will look at problems very, very differently. And you'll see the Olympians, when the 2020 Olympics was postponed because of COVID.
Right.
Most of them, even though the gyms were closed and they couldn't meet up with their coaches, they were still training in the parks and, whatever way they can. Yeah. And almost none of them dropped out. They continued, and they competed in 2021.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was reading that story about Peggy Whitson, I don't know if you watched the Apple TV show For All Mankind, but they definitely modeled some characters after her. There was a definite paying of homage to her story.
Yes. Yeah. It's actually, most of the astronauts who I interviewed did not get in on their first try.
Yeah.
Most had to reapply. All right. You want the third one?
Third one.
Okay. So part of the things that you have to understand when you are trying to become more successful is, no matter what you do, you cannot rest on your laurels. What you did early in your career, you have to do later in your career as well. Kobe Bryant was known for being at the gym at 4 or 5 a.m. and doing his warm-ups and doing the layups. What he was doing was no different than what you'd see in any junior high gym. He might have had better sneakers and more expensive coaches, but the warm-up was exactly the same. He never said, I'm an NBA champion. I don't need to practice my layups. He never once said that. He would practice over and over and over again. So you want to have that really strong foundation, and you constantly want to reinforce it. What made you good early on is what's going to make you good later. And I have interviewed Neil Katyal, who argued over 50 cases before the Supreme Court, uses the same strategies for case 50 as he did for case 1 to prepare. So if it's good for lawyers before the highest court in the land and NBA champions, I think the rest of us need to start doing that too.
Yeah. That's not necessarily my strength. I tend to get bored doing the same thing again and again. And I admire these athletes, who will get up and get in the pool, go to the track, go to the gym, and for years and years do the same thing day in, day out to just hone their craft. It's amazing.
That's right. That's right. Even with the same playlist sometimes.
Yeah.
It's not wild.
All right. And then the fourth one.
The fourth one. So this is what was the most fascinating to me. Because remember what I said earlier about leaders have to read 8 hours a day. That's how you're going to become successful. And you have to wake up at 5 a.m. and all of this stuff. That's really not what it's about. It's about leveraging your peak performance hours, and it's about opening your mind up to new knowledge. So while Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and Mark Cuban could read for 3 to 8 hours a day, that's not what made them successful. It's how they integrated all that information that they took in and started connecting dots that other people didn't yet see. So while they do it by reading, you can watch YouTube, you can listen to LinkedIn Learning. I have a bunch of courses there. You can listen to podcasts. Hopefully your listeners are learning something new here today. You can listen to books on Audible. You can have conversations with people. That is where the mentorship really comes into play. So all of these things are so critical, the opening your mind up to new knowledge. So don't worry about reading 8 hours a day, but go in every day with an open mind and absorb and absorb and absorb. Even if you don't understand what you're going to do with this information now, you might be able to connect it to another piece of information later on. And that's going to be a connection that other people don't yet see. Yeah. Now, before your listeners ask me about that 5 a.m., if you're a night owl and you don't go to bed till 3 a.m., you're not waking up at 5 a.m. Let's just be realistic. But what these high achievers do is that they leverage their peak performance hours. So I am a morning person. I do wake up early, which means I do my most focused work in the morning. For me, that's a lot of writing, that's editing. I don't waste my time with passive tasks with social media and emails or Zooms. I don't let that eat into my peak performance hours. I save those for the hours that I'm more sluggish, which is usually after the lunchtime hour. Yeah. Which is why people don't know, but we're recording this in the afternoon because of that.
Your afternoon, my evening.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to be a morning person as well. I like to get my workout done first thing in the morning. Also gives me more energy for the day. And I definitely do my best thinking before lunchtime. After that, right. It's more of the routine things.
That's right. Same.
And I think this point you make about, just being open. I mean, you can learn from anyone. You can learn in any situation. You can learn anywhere. And, all those seemingly random facts, they do, if you treat them right, sort of gel in some way that will find their way to being helpful to you at some point down the road.
That's right. That's right. Some way, somehow. You have to just be open to it, just open to all of that information, and you'll see. Right? When they say, when the student is ready, the teacher arrives, that's what that means.
Yeah.
That's exactly what that means. The knowledge is everywhere. You just might not have been open to it all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. You emphasize the importance at several points in the book about finding your tribe or your community or your people. Yeah. I wanted to ask you just to talk a little bit more about that.
So you have different people. We call that a community of practice that you can understand what you are going through. And these are people who can see you and support you at different stages of your career. And those people might change over time. So your group of people who you had in your 20s might not be the same group who are in your 40s. But these are people when you accomplish something, when you get promoted, they're there to support you. When you are having a tough time, they are there to help you. And you are also doing that for them. They've got their eyes and ears open for opportunities for you, and you are doing that for them as well. And I think that's something that every person needs to surround themselves with. I think you also need a team of mentors, not just one, right? Because we always used to think it's somebody who's older and wiser and male usually. But that is an outdated way of thinking about things. You need a team of mentors, some who look like you, some who don't look like you, older, younger, at your level, because that will really show you new perspectives, show you new skills, show you new opportunities. But again, you have to be open to it.
That was one of the things I noticed about the Thinkers 50 conference that I thought was really great. I mean, I went there really just as a listener. I'm not looking necessarily to build my stature as a speaker or anything like that. For some of the people there, getting on that list, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it has real economic value in terms of
That's
your
correct.
ability to do consulting work and keynote speeches and all of that. I didn't have that at play, but one of the things that impressed me is despite all that, it was like such a supportive environment. I think when you find those places, right, like your community or your tribe, and there is that great level of mutual support, it's just raises you up.
It really does. And it's so fascinating. Amy Edmondson, who was ranked number one, the first time she was ranked number one in 2021, I was ranked, I got the Radar Award, which is the top emerging management thinker, and she got the top management thinker. Now, what's so fascinating is that I study success, and her new book is about studying failure. And we have had to be on the same stage more than once. And you would think that it's two competitors, but no, we're thinking about ways to collaborate. And that's not the first time. I mean, there are people in the Thinkers 50, we work together, we collaborate, we share, if I can't do this keynote, I will ask somebody who's in the Thinkers 50, is anyone available that they can do it? We also have for people who made the Radar list, which are the top emerging thinkers. Thinkers 50 announces 30 every year. I started a chat group for us. And this way we can learn from each other. We can promote each other's stuff. Yesterday, I said, I'm working on an article. I'm looking to reference an article about whatever the topic was. Is anyone here an expert in that? Did you write a paper on it that you can send me? Right. And that happens all the time. So if I want to learn about a specific topic, I've got the experts right there, literally in my chat group. So I can get that information immediately. And when you get people like that, and you get people who want to just raise you up and amplify your work, and you're doing the same thing for them, trust me, that's what you need in your life. Yeah, absolutely. I do want to go back to mentoring, but I guess just to close out the topic of your book, again, for people who aren't these exceptionally high performers, what advice do you offer to them in terms of how to raise their game to the degree that they can? Yes. So in the book, The Success Factor, the third part, I broke the book up into 3 sections. And I talk about what the 4 elements of success and why you need them. But the third section is all about how to implement it in your life and things you can start doing immediately, right? These small, low-hanging fruit things that you can do to start improving your success. And again, as I mentioned, I created a buffet of options for each thing. So if we're talking about you need to leverage your peak performance hours, well, how are you going to do that? So I give you all sorts of ideas and instructions on how to do that. I tell people this is the book you put by your nightstand, so you can flip through it at any time for another idea. Oh, I tried this. It worked for a while, but I sort of got bored with it. I need something new. Okay, I've got something new for you. Yeah. And that is really to help people elevate their success. And people who have done it, I get messages from people all the time. They got promoted at work. They were able to join these choice committees. I mean, all kinds of great things happen. Got to be pretty fulfilling to hear that. Yeah, it definitely is. So back on mentoring, you talked earlier about how mentors out-earn, they're happier, they suffer less burnout, all of those things. The mentees. Mm-hmm. The mentees, sorry. Mm-hmm. What is it about mentoring that drives that? So this is something that I talk about quite a bit in the new upcoming book, The Financial Times Guide to Mentoring. Sometimes we need someone to hold up a mirror because we're so deep inside the jar. We don't have perspective. We can't read the label. And everything is doom and gloom. And when you have a mentor, they have that 60,000-foot view, and they could say, it's not as bad as you think it is. This is a moment in time, right? But this is really a much longer game. So they're able to do that. They can hold you accountable when you say, oh, I want to, you want to do this? Fine. What are you doing to make this happen? Right? You said you wanted it. What are you doing about it? So they can be your guide by your side. They can be the gutter rails. They can offer the scaffolding. They could be the sounding board. They could be the cheerleader, right?
Yeah.
Those are all the things that are part of the mentor roles. They have two main functions. One is to help with your career, to strategize and help you focus and set goals and help you achieve those goals. And the other is to be your cheerleader and to really promote and talk about your successes and amplify your work and cheer you on when you're feeling down. The really incredible mentors can do both. In fact, one of the people who I interviewed was Dr. Bob Lefkowitz. He won the Nobel Prize in 2012. And early on in the 60s, he was working at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. And after he won the Nobel Prize in 2012, they reached out to his former mentor at the National Institutes of Health. And the mentor said, my biggest role was to keep Bob out of a deep, dark depression.
Yeah.
Because for 2 years, his experiments weren't working. Nothing worked. Can you imagine failure every single day? And he was there to, say, Bob, keep going, keep going, keep going. Well, he kept going all the way to the Nobel Prize.
Yeah, it comes back to that element of perseverance.
That's right.
That we talked about earlier in the conversation.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So mentoring, there's an element of fit and chemistry that has to be at play. So for somebody who is interested in finding a mentor, we'll set aside the idea of having a group of mentors, but just to find a mentor, what are the right places to find a mentor?
I say wherever there are people, there are potential mentors.
Okay.
And don't worry about giving people titles. We have enough titles. We have enough labels. Really what you want to see is who you can connect with, who is making you think harder and deeper and differently. Those are the people you want to be around. They're willing to tickle your curiosity. They're willing to answer your questions. They have the time. Those are the type of people that you want to be around. So wherever there are people, there are potential mentors. I have mentors who text me. That's how we can communicate because we're in different time zones and setting up a Zoom is almost impossible. I have a quick question. I just text them. And they text me right back. And sometimes they leave me a voice message because that's easier and that's fine.
Yeah. How should a mentee come into the relationship?
I think the mentee has to do the heavy lifting.
Mm-hmm.
They have to know what they want. So if somebody comes in and they say, JR, help me with my career. And you'll say, Ruth, where do I even start? Right? So it has to be contextual. You have to say, I need help with this specific thing. And when you start doing that and make it contextual and make it specific, you will see that they can give you targeted guidance. Yeah. Otherwise, it's a lot of hand waving, right? If you want help, you have to be very, very specific. And it grows and grows because people like to attach themselves with people who have the potential to be successful. And you have to prove it. And you have to show, all right, JR, listen to what you said. I did most of it. I didn't agree with this one piece, but I did most of it and listen to what happened, right?
Yeah.
Now you're excited.
Yeah. I mean, having been on both sides of these relationships, I've certainly been in a situation, particularly when you have like mentor matching things that you'll do at work or school or whatever. And, the mentee comes into it and kind of looks at you and says, okay, what do we do? And, I mean, pretty quickly, you got to put the work back on them. And if they don't get that, then it's just not going to go anywhere.
It's not going to go anywhere. And to what you say about the mentor matching programs, I've yet to see one that works because they're so random. They'll say, oh, you're both from the United States, therefore you're a perfect mentor-mentee. Well, not everyone from the same country or state or city or zip code or school is exactly the same.
Right.
So I think instead creating these organic ways for people to connect, and I think teaching people how to have these professional conversations with people, what we used to call networking, that is so much more important than any match you will make.
Yeah.
Because if people know how to have those conversations, they will naturally be attracted and gravitate towards certain people.
Yeah. Are there tools or frameworks or things like that you recommend to people to help them kind of get the flywheel effect in the relationship going?
Yes. So I'll give your listeners two resources that they can use. The first one, I think conversation starters are so important. And I think you cannot go to any event without having this toolbox of conversation starters, benign ways to start conversations that are beyond the weather, right?
Yeah.
So I put 13 of my favorite together, which I have personally used and found them extremely successful. So your listeners can go to Ruth Gotian, RuthGotian.com/conversation, and they'll get all those conversation starters. And if they want to know how to develop a mentoring team, then they can go to RuthGotian.com/mentoring team. And there's a bullseye worksheet that teaches them how to put a mentoring team together, which is something I think that we worked on at Thinkers 50.
Yeah. How would you talk about a mentoring team relative to the idea of like a personal board of advisors?
It's really the same thing. People have different terms for it. They also call it constellation and the kitchen cabinet. And it's really the same thing. I advocate for people at 3 levels, people who are senior to you, at your level, and junior to you. And then I also have all these different types of people that you should have on your mentoring team within your industry, outside your industry, retirees, people who can teach you skills, people who can give you perspective, all kinds of people like that I think you should have on your mentoring team if you really want to get it robust.
Talk a little bit about reverse mentoring. We hear more about that these days.
Back in the day, the traditional way was somebody junior goes up to somebody senior to learn from them. But now those in senior roles are learning that there's much to learn from those who are junior to them. Now, remember, we have 5 generations working in the workplace right now. So if you want to know the role of social media in your learning, you want to learn hybrid learning and how that impacts what you're doing. Because remember, people who were in Generation X or above did not have internet when they were in school, right? So they don't understand to the full effect of how you can learn in a hybrid learning environment. They didn't have that. So it's learning from somebody who's different than you, usually at a lower rank. That is what reverse mentoring is. And it's the person who's in the senior role who's open to learning and doing most of the listening.
You also bring up, I know in the book, the term friendters.
Yes. Yes.
So what do you mean by a friendter, and how is that similar and different from a mentor?
Right. So a friendter is a peer who's also your friend and a peer mentor. And I share the story of these 2 incredible women, Lynn Wooten and Erica James, who met in their 20s when they were graduate students at the University of Michigan. They happened to be sitting next to each other in an auditorium. Today, they talk to each other 5 times a week on their way to work. They have written a few books together, their latest one being The Prepared Leader. They do crisis management leadership. Lynn Wooten, right, these 2 women who they met as grad students. Lynn Wooten is now the president of Simmons University in Boston. And Erica James is the dean of Wharton, the business school at the University of Pennsylvania. They are best friends. They are each other's mentors. And they are friendtors. They're friends who are each other's mentors. They learn from each other. And, when I spoke to them, they each have their strengths and they each have their area of opportunity. But the strength of one is not the strength of the other, which is why they make such a great pair.
These relationships don't always go as you would like them to go. So what are some of the challenges that you run into other than just a lack of chemistry and, challenges, conflicts? What advice do you have for people for how to work through the things that sometimes arise in a mentoring relationship?
Or when a mentor turns into a tormentor? Because that could happen. They take credit for your work. Right? Or they're too busy to help you, or they will not have difficult conversations, or they will not let you work with anyone else because they see that as a threat to their own role or their own position, or somebody who wants to be everybody's friend and will not stand up for you, or gives you these menial tasks so that you can't grow. They try to keep you in your space, or they're trying to create you in their version, what I call the mini-me. Those are all ways that a mentor can turn into a tormentor.
What advice would you give somebody who wants to be doing more mentoring in terms of how to be a good mentor?
If they want to be a good mentor, well, I think first of all, learning how to listen is one of the key traits, because it's not about what you want, it's what the mentee wants.
Yeah.
Right. And learning how to listen to what they really want and help guide the mentee on what they really want and give them resources and introduce them to people and help them overcome imposter syndrome and open doors they didn't even know existed. Right. Think of what my mentor told me, right? He told me to think bigger, do something important, not just interesting. You want to push them to think bigger than they thought possible.
Yeah.
Those are the ways to be a great mentor. And if your listeners have access to LinkedIn Learning, I actually have a course on that called Becoming an Inspiring Mentor.
You do research, you write regularly on this topic. What are some of the innovations, if there is such a thing, that are coming to the world of mentoring?
I think we're beginning to understand the role that a successful mentor can have. We realize that we need to start training the mentors. We've always trained mentees on how to do well. We've never trained mentors, but we're realizing that that is an opportunity. We're realizing that we can't mentor in a one-size-fits-all model. We need to mentor different people in different ways, and there are different models of mentoring. So we need to fully understand how to mentor people who are different than us, how to mentor people who are neurodiverse, how to mentor people who are hybrid, right? All of these things become something that's ongoing and something that's learning. But you know what? We are also realizing that even people who are at the top of the game still need mentors. So as soon as people are open to that, world's going to be a better place.
Yeah. And for the companies, I mean, given that most mentor matching programs fail, what advice do you give?
I tell them when you do things one-on-one, it usually doesn't work. So instead, I offer that they create these hubs, these groups, put a couple of mentors and a couple of mentees together so that the mentees can learn from each other. And if, let's say, the two of us are mentors, if it's not my area of expertise, maybe it's your area of expertise. So I can also, as a mentor, learn from you in the process. It also creates the safety net, because what if you leave the organization? Well, what happens to your mentees? And they're stranded. Right. But this way, if there's already somebody there, there's another mentor they could piggyback and they can tag team, if you will. So nobody's ever left stranded. And then somebody new can come in as a new mentor. There also needs to be an exit ramp. So if it's not working for any reason, right, they're not gelling or whatever it is, there has to be an exit ramp where the mentees can then find a different mentor.
Yeah. Well, even the best of mentoring relationships, they run their course.
That's right. That's right. Look, my mentors when I was in my 20s are not my mentors now. The mentor who gave me those 6 words of brilliant advice, he's a friend now, right? It's not someone who I talk to.
He's a friend.
I have new mentors. He's a friend. Exactly.
So, you described yourself as a mere mortal earlier, but you're a high achiever. I mean, you've made the Thinkers 50 top of the radar list. You're on the main list now. What do you think's fueled your success over the years?
I think the biggest lesson I have learned is that if you want success, you have to go after it. You can't expect other people to open the doors for you. You have to tear them down and do the work. And, we've all learned that we shouldn't market our successes, but then how are we supposed to help people if people don't even know what we do? So once I've learned it's okay to do that, and that's when things started happening.
Yeah, I think you can still do that with humility.
Absolutely. I insist on doing it on the work, right? So it's not about what I achieved, it's what the work has achieved.
Yeah.
And that's much better. And I'm much more comfortable with that.
Yeah. Can you describe an instance where you tore the doors down?
So many. So there was an award, which was a big award in my industry, and it was my last year of eligibility. Let me backtrack 2 years before that, I nominated somebody who I thought was very well deserving. And I nominated him. He told me who to ask for letters of recommendation. I put the packet together and he got the award. 2 years later was my last year of eligibility. Now, when I nominated the person, somebody else wanted to nominate me and asked him for a letter of support. And he said, I can't because Ruth is already nominating me. It would be weird. But I remember he told me about it. So I asked that person who wanted to nominate me 2 years later, I said, would you nominate me? And she said, of course. And I said, okay, I learned from the guy, a few years ago. I'll tell you who would write my letters of support. Here's my bio. Here's everything you need. All you need to do is, put a ribbon on it and sign your name.
Right.
And that was the first time I ever asked somebody to nominate me.
Yeah.
And I won the award. I was not a faculty member at that time. No, I was a faculty member, but I was the second woman and the youngest person to ever win the award.
Yeah.
And if I would not have asked somebody to nominate me, that never would have happened.
Yeah. Besides that knocking down doors part, what are some of the other things that you've had to work at developing that weren't necessarily natural strengths for you?
Can you believe writing?
Yeah.
So I never enjoyed writing until I was writing my dissertation. And I realized that I was always writing with somebody else's prompts, not things that I was interested in, something that I was told to write. But when I was writing my dissertation, it's what I loved. Years later, I still write academic articles. I'm a faculty member, but my real joy is writing articles in Forbes and Psychology Today and Harvard Business Review, because that's more lay language. That's things that strategies people can implement immediately.
Yeah.
And I also write for the career section of Nature. And I have this writing partner that we wrote a piece together for Scientific American, and then for Nature. And I said, I want to write about networking for introverts. And I approached my friend and she said, I can't write it with you. This is not my area, but this is your area. You write it. I had never written anything by myself before. I wrote it. I submitted the piece. It was rejected. And I was crushed. I was totally crushed. And then it was picked up by another editor. That piece later went on to become one of the most popular in the top 2% of all Nature articles. It still gets a life of its own. Every few months it comes up again. It's called Networking for Introverts. Now that's one of them. The other is I had a goal of writing for Harvard Business Review. And it's a very particular style. And I was rejected 5 times. And I was actually telling that astronaut, Dr. Peggy Whitson, about it when she told me her story of waiting 10 years. And she said, you can't give up. Figure out what you're missing and keep submitting. So I did. And I actually wrote a piece about the 4 elements of success found in the book. And it was accepted. And that was the most engaged article of 2023 on Harvard Business Review, meaning people spent more time reading it than anything else.
Yeah.
So I implemented the lessons from the book.
Yeah. Good for you. Any last career advice that you would want to give our listeners, or something you wish you had known when you were straight out of your undergraduate days?
I really, it's advice that my late father gave me, which is if you don't ask, you don't get.
It's true.
And I have learned over the years to ask, because when you ask, you're giving people the opportunity to say yes.
Probably a good place for us to stop. This has been great. I appreciate you doing it with me. It was a fun conversation.
Thank you. It was really exciting. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Ruth. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye.
I want to thank Ruth for joining me today to cover her groundbreaking work on mentorship and success. If you'd like to make the most of your career and be as successful as possible, you visit pathwise.io and become a member. Basic membership is free. You can also sign up on the website for the Pathwise newsletter and follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Career Sessions, Career Lessons. We hope the nuggets of wisdom shared today help guide your path to the successful career of your dreams. This podcast series is part of Pathwise.io, which is here to help you live the career you want. We provide a comprehensive mix of career and professional development events, insights, tools, and exercises backed by a group of leading coaches and other career management experts. If you aspire to something more or just something different in your career, join us at Pathwise.io. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. See you again on the next episode.